What if the price of burying your loved one was not just grief, but a hidden fortune funneled straight to the powerful? In just 43 seconds, that is how long it took for Jasmine Crockett to hold up a blood-stained funeral bill and accuse Eric Trump of turning America's grief into a gold mine. The chamber went dead silent. Then Donald Trump stormed in fists, clenched voice, shaking with fury, but the truth roared louder than his rage. If a billionaire can profit from the dead, what else have we buried and called it justice? The hearing room did not feel like Congress. It felt like a courtroom without a verdict, like a church where grief had not yet found its prayer. Overhead lights glared like interrogation lamps. Cameras blinked red like sniper sights locked on every breath, every twitch. Even the air had that thick metallic weight, like the stillness right before lightning tears open a summer sky. Imagine carrying proof heavier than a coffin. Could you face the man who priced your pain? And then she walked in. Evelyn Monroe did not need an introduction. She carried her testimony in her hands, a worn leather purse edges frayed its zipper stiff from age and too many tears. She walked like someone carrying something heavier than grief, like someone carrying proof. She did not look at the cameras. She did not need to. She looked straight ahead toward the faces that would pretend to care, and the one face she came to confront. Jasmine Crockett watched her the way a firefighter watches smoke before it turns to flame. Eric Trump did not watch her at all. He was looking at his phone. What if one mother's voice could shatter an empire built on silence? Evelyn sat down, adjusted the microphone with slow shaking fingers. Her voice, when it came, was not broken. It was brittle, worn like a bone that had cracked long ago and never fully healed. My son's name was Micah, she said. 21 years old. He died alone. COVID. He could not breathe, and I was not allowed in the room. They would not let me hold him even after. She paused, then reached into her purse. But this came in the mail 2 days before his ashes did. She unfolded the paper, crisp white, uncomfortably clean. She held it up like evidence in a murder trial. $14.523, she read. That is what they charged me for a wooden casket, no embalming, no flowers. I could not afford a service, but they charged me for air conditioning in the viewing room, even though no one was allowed to view him. The room froze. Even the cameras seemed to pause. Across from her, Eric Trump finally looked up. Could a single map expose a web of deceit stretching across the nation? Jasmine leaned forward, her fingers steepled calm like a loaded spring. Mrs. Monroe, she said, her voice steady and soft like a quiet storm. Can you confirm the name of the funeral home? Ken Shaw and Sons, Evelyn replied. Fort Worth. Jasmine nodded once, then tapped a remote. Behind her, a screen lit up. Digital red pins piercing a map of the United States. Fort Worth, Atlanta, Jacksonville, Baton Rouge. Each pin pulsed as Jasmine pressed a button. Names appeared. Ken Shaw and Sons Eden. Mortuary Gracebridge Services, and beneath each name a common signature owned by Red Elm Holdings, LLC. Red Elm Holdings, Jasmine said, is a company buried under 4 layers of LLC filings, shells within shells. But we followed the trail. She clicked again. A corporate filing came up. Another click. Bank statements. Another click. A signature. Eric Trump's face filled the screen beside it. This man, she said, approved 4 invoices under Red Elm Holdings, all submitted under the federal COVID reimbursement program, all billed to families in Black and Latino neighborhoods, all inflated. Eric shifted. The camera zoomed. Jasmine turned back to Evelyn. This is not just a funeral bill, she said. It is a receipt for silence. It is a price tag they stapled to your grief, and then turning to face the nation. The question is not what they charge. The question is, what did they think we would not notice? What happens when unflinching eyes meet a crumbling facade? Jasmine did not flinch. Not when Evelyn Monroe's voice cracked. Not when Eric Trump folded his arms like a prince on trial. Not when the room inhaled grief like smoke and held it in silence. She simply tapped the remote again, like pulling the trigger on a truth someone spent years burying. Behind her, the screen changed. A corporate tree unfolded. Simple at first, then multiplying. 4 layers deep, names that meant nothing. Addresses that did not exist. Each shell more opaque than the last. But every branch, every dead-end company curved back to one root, Red Elm Holdings. Jasmine set her tone colder now, sharper. Formed in 2017, registered in Delaware. On paper, it is run by a man named Leonard Parrish. No public photo, no listed residence. But that is the first shell. She clicked again. Another box appeared, then another. Parrish was not real. Neither were the three entities stacked beneath him. And yet somehow they were granted over $49 million in federal COVID reimbursement funds between 2020 and 2022, with zero public hearings, zero audits, and zero oversight. But one name shows up in the banking record. She continued voice tightening only once. A mistake. A routing number shared with a family trust Trump Liberty Trust Fort Lauderdale branch. The screen changed again. Now it was not just numbers. It was Eric Trump's signature. A gasp rippled from the press gallery, unfiltered and raw. A reporter dropped her pen. Another mouthed, "Oh my God." Across the aisle, Eric's smirk slipped. Jasmine did not look at him. Not yet. Her eyes were on the map. How deep does the map of exploitation run before it hits bone? Click. The screen zoomed out to a full map of the United States. Red pins popped one by one. Fort Worth, New Orleans, Birmingham, Memphis, Baltimore, Camden, Southside, Chicago, East LA. Each pin representing a Red Elm funeral home. Each dot marking where grief was most common and oversight was non-existent. They did not pick these neighborhoods by accident. Jasmine said they picked zip codes with the lowest financial literacy, the least access to legal aid, and the most unclaimed COVID bodies per capita. She let that sink in. 5 seconds of pure silence. Then they did not just bury the dead. They calculated them. What if one invoice could ignite a firestorm of outrage? Eric leaned forward finally. His lips parted. He was going to speak. But Jasmine did not stop. She held up a printed invoice. This, she said, was sent to a family in Baton Rouge. A mother who buried both her parents within 8 days. Charged $2.187 for what post-cremation odor neutralization. A beat, then another. She never saw either casket. More gasps. Then came the anger. A congressman from Florida shouted, "This is not the place for personal attacks." The chairman banged his gavel. Jasmine raised her hand, calm, controlled, and silence returned like obedience. "This is not personal," she said, finally turning her eyes toward Eric. "It is math. Cold, brutal, profitable math." He stared back at her, but his eyes blinked. Once, twice, no more smirk. Jasmine took one last step forward. They thought poor people would not ask questions. They thought minority families would be too broken to push back. They thought no one would notice when grief became a business model. Her voice did not rise, it dropped low, final, precise, but someone did. She turned back to the room, to the press, to the millions watching live from kitchen tables and hospital beds. So now ask yourself, how many bodies did it take before the money started to stink? Can emails expose the cruel heart of a calculated scheme? The silence did not last. It never does in rooms like these, where truth is treated like an interruption and power hates being cornered. A Republican congressman from Alabama leaned back in his chair, exhaled through his nose like a man unimpressed, and muttered loud enough for the mic to catch it. "She is politicizing grief," another snorted. A woman in pearls from the Georgia delegation rolled her eyes and whispered something about Democrats weaponizing tragedy again. Chuckles followed, quiet, dismissive, cruel. As if Jasmine had not just drawn a red line between profit and pain, Jasmine did not flinch. She reached under her folder and pulled out a bound packet. No headlines, no slogans, just emails. Dozens of them, headers, timestamps, signatures, words typed without shame, because no one ever thought the public would read them. This, Jasmine said, her tone flat like a scalpel, is an internal communication dated May 14th, 2020. Subject line: billing strategies for high distress zip codes. She did not look up, she just read. Families in urban corridors are less likely to question package breakdowns. Offer them bundled rates with emotional add-ons. Push viewing room charges and grief services. Keep language vague. Jasmine flipped the page. Target homes with rapid fatalities. Multiple death households can be leveraged for volume incentives. Consider cross-charging body transport to separate invoices. There were no chuckles. Now the woman in pearls froze mid-blink. Jasmine closed the folder softly, then raised her eyes not to the Republicans, not even to Eric, but to the millions watching beyond the room. The families with unanswered bills. The mothers who never saw a casket but got charged for velvet lining. How many Americans, she asked, slowly buried more than loved ones? What if the numbers revealed a predator hiding in plain sight? Silence cracked like thunder. Eric Trump shifted in his seat. One hand clenched the armrest. The other fumbled for a pen that was not there. His face flushed not from guilt, but from calculation. Jasmine had moved past suggestion. This was evidence, this was structure, this was motive. A congressman across the aisle tried to deflect. Those emails do not prove intent. Businesses optimize all the time. Jasmine turned to him, her voice low but cutting. Optimizing grief, she asked. That is what we are calling it now. He started to speak, but she kept going. They did not just overcharge, they studied suffering, modeled it, turned trauma into line items. Emotional add-ons who puts a price tag on mourning. She paused long enough to let the words settle like ash over a fire. They did not sell funerals. They sold silence. And they sold it to people least able to afford it. Families gasping in the middle of a pandemic, scraping change to bury someone they never got to say goodbye to. She turned back to the panel to Eric, and finally to Evelyn Monroe, still seated with hands folded around her now crumpled receipt. You want to call that politics? Jasmine asked. Fine then, let us be clear. This is not left versus right. This is the living versus the looters. No one moved. No one breathed. The chairman cleared his throat and reached for the gavel. But Jasmine was not done. She looked straight into the camera, her voice low, sharp, and final. If this is what they did to the dead, what do you think they are willing to do to the rest of us? How could $49 million vanish into shadows while families begged for mercy? Jasmine did not pause for applause. She was not here for that. The room was still reeling from what she had exposed, but she was not finished. She had not even started cutting deep. She turned back to the screen behind her, clicked once more, and the next slide bloomed like a wound torn open on live television. $49 million, she said. The words hit like a punch. A spreadsheet filled the screen columns of names, dates, and government check numbers. Red Elm Holdings CARES Act emergency reimbursement, $49 million. Approved, transferred, closed. She stepped forward and underlined a single line with a red laser pointer, the light trembling ever so slightly at the edge of her hand. This payment, she said, was for 118 funerals, processed in under 72 hours. That is less than 40 minutes per body. And this, she flipped to another, was approved in 41 minutes. No oversight, no verification, just a number and a yes. She turned to the committee. While hospitals were begging for ventilators, funeral homes were being handed blank checks. A murmur rolled through the room. Even the Republicans did not interrupt her this time. Jasmine flipped another page. Between March 2020 and December 2021, Red Elm Holdings filed 276 federal reimbursement claims. Not one was denied, not one was flagged. All were approved in under 48 hours. On the screen now, a side-by-side appeared. One image showed overflowing hospitals. The other, Red Elm's Fort Lauderdale headquarters, being renovated with marble floors and imported chandeliers. She looked at Eric Trump. Care to guess how much of this money went to actual burial costs? She asked. The answer is no one knows. Because not a single claim was audited, she let that land, then walked over to the committee's long table and placed a manila folder down, tapping it once. But we ran the numbers. Inside the folder, a breakdown by district. Red Elm overcharged an average of 38% across all invoices, charged for unused services, double-billed body transfers, listed non-existent clergy. In one case, a mother was charged a COVID surcharge on a cremation performed 2 years before the virus even existed. They did not just take advantage of the system, Jasmine said, her voice tightening. They saw the pandemic coming and got ready to make a killing. She tapped again. Another email appeared from Red Elm's legal department, dated February 2020, weeks before the shutdowns, subject contingency billing protocol. The body read, we should prepare flexible invoice structures for emergency reimbursement in case federal funds become available. While doctors were bracing for body bags, Jasmine said, eyes locked on the screen. Their lawyers were preparing templates. Eric Trump shifted. The cameras caught it. His tie now loose. His hands no longer folded. He glanced toward the exit for the first time. Jasmine saw it. Everyone did. She clicked one final slide. An overhead drone shot of Red Elm's main storage facility. A parking lot full of refrigeration trucks. One marked with a handwritten sign, capacity 94. Below it, another email. If FEMA asks, call it temporary storage. Jasmine did not raise her voice. She did not need to. They treated the dead like inventory, she said, and they moved fast because they knew grief does not keep receipts. What if grief was priced like stocks rising with every tear shed? Jasmine stood motionless for a beat, letting the silence stretch until it felt like a verdict. What came next was not about numbers, it was about intent. Until now, the room had been reacting to damage. But now it was going to see design. She held up a fresh set of documents, emails printed cleanly, stapled marked with the word leaked in red pen. The whistleblower had worked inside Red Elm's pricing department. Someone buried beneath management and marketing, someone who saw everything because they were the one asked to hide it. Jasmine unfolded the first page and said almost too softly, "These were not written by accident. They were written by a system that knew exactly what it was doing." The screen behind her changed again. A 5-row matrix appeared titled in bold, tiered pricing protocol, internal use only. At first glance, it looked like a loyalty chart, but then the room began reading the categories: denial, shock, public, sobbing, angry, bargaining, desperate, and compliant. Jasmine highlighted the rightmost column, 5%, 15%, 25%, 40%, and then unlimited adjustment permitted. She looked up. They priced grief like it was a stock market. And the more pain they sensed, the more they charged. There was no outburst this time. No gasps, just an audible tightening in the air, chairs creaking under clenched arms, lips, parting but not speaking. Jasmine turned the page. The 7th of January, 2021, she said, eyes scanning the crowd. An internal message sent to Red Elm's pricing team. Her voice stayed calm, but something in it sharpened like the blade that cuts deepest is the one you never see coming. Then she read it aloud, every word clear and lethal. Black families do not scrutinize line items. If the total feels reasonable, they will not fight the breakdown. Recommend bundling high-margin services with emotional terms, legacy, curation, farewell experience, etc. It hit like a slap. Cold, blunt, disgusting. One woman on the panel shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Another glanced toward the exits. Eric Trump did not look up. Jasmine did not stop. She clicked again, and the next email appeared. This one is called Zip Code Heat Index. The subject alone made the room flinch. They analyzed regions based on trauma density and income brackets, suggested targeting areas with high Black and Latino populations because, quote, lower resistance to emotional markup. Her voice dropped just slightly. Not just racism, not just classism, but both weaponized against the very people least able to fight back. She walked a few steps slow and deliberate, holding the page in one hand like it weighed more than paper ever should. Another message flashed on the screen. Subject line, high-yield families. Jasmine let that title hang before she explained. It refers to families who lost more than one member. They called it an opportunity. Suggested bundling the charges into tribute packages. She stopped in front of Eric, now eyes locked. They did not see grieving people. They saw high-yield households. They did not hear crying. They saw margins. Her voice tightened into steel. They did not ask how they could help. They asked how much they could charge. She stepped back, looked out into the audience, into the camera, and finally toward Evelyn Monroe, whose face had gone pale but whose eyes still burned. They turned death into data, grief into inventory, families into spreadsheets. Jasmine's hand trembled slightly as she held the final page. They did not just exploit emotion, they engineered it. And then she asked, as if to the nation itself, if this is how they treat our dead, what do you think they see when they look at the rest of us? What if one memo linked the scandal straight to the top, shaking the foundations of power? The pages in Jasmine's hands no longer felt like evidence. They felt like loaded ammunition. The room had already swallowed one horror after another. Price matrices based on tiers, emails, laced with racism, grief, sliced into profit margins. But Jasmine knew what came next would pierce deeper, because this time the blood trail led all the way to the patriarch. She took a step forward, her heels clicking like gunshots against marble. This memo, she said, lifting a printed page, was uncovered in a shared drive between Red Elm Holdings and a campaign-affiliated consulting firm. It is dated October 2023, weeks before the election. Her voice stayed level, but the heat underneath it was unmistakable. The screen behind her lit up with a scan of the document. The subject line was short, urgent approval. Bulk package variants. Jasmine's laser pointer circled one handwritten note in red ink at the bottom, barely legible but undeniable. Eric said Dad approved. Jasmine read aloud. Just bury it. A ripple of sound rushed through the room like water breaking a dam. Whispers, gasps, a stunned laugh from the press gallery, and then bang, the committee chair slammed the gavel. This is a federal hearing, he barked. Control the room. But no one was listening. Not anymore. Because Jasmine had just cracked open the possibility that this was not just Eric's scheme, it was orchestrated higher. Much higher. She let the silence return one beat at a time before speaking again. Let us be clear, she said, locking eyes with the panel. This is not a staff memo. This was not scribbled on a sticky note. This was part of a formal billing variance approval process. And someone had the audacity to write in ink that the former president of the United States approved a fraud scheme involving dead Americans. Eric Trump shifted visibly, now jaw-tight, fist clenched. For the first time, his confidence looked cracked. Jasmine noticed, but she did not stop there. She clicked once more. Another email appeared, this one, with an attachment, a scanned calendar invite titled Financial Wrap-Up Call with a list of recipients, Red Elm executives, finance lawyers, and Donald J. Trump listed as optional. Jasmine turned to the room. What kind of business, she asked, needs to brief a former president on how much money it has made from funerals? No one answered. Jasmine did not expect them to. She stepped back, exhaled slowly, then dropped the final line like a blade across stone. Was this a business or a family racket? The words did not just hang, they detonated. Across America, on every live stream and headline, they echoed, not whispered. Echoed. Eric lowered his eyes. One of the Republican aides stood up and quietly walked out. The chair's gavel rested in his hand, but he did not lift it again. Because at that moment, everyone in that room was thinking the same thing. If the father signed off, how many sons got paid? What if the most powerful man in politics crashed the scene like a storm unleashed? There was no warning, no formal announcement, no procedural notice, just the sound of heavy doors creaking open like thunder in a chapel. And suddenly the most recognizable silhouette in American politics was striding into the chamber, flanked by two Secret Service agents and a scowl sharp enough to draw blood. Donald J. Trump did not walk in like a man under scrutiny. He walked in like he owned the floor beneath him. Cameras turned in unison. Reporters lunged for angles. Half the committee froze mid-note. And Jasmine Crockett, who had just finished reading a memo that linked the former president's name to a COVID funeral racket, did not blink once. He bypassed the protocol entirely. I am invoking my right to respond to defamatory lies, he said, voice booming across the walls like he was still on a campaign stage. One aide tried to protest, but Trump waved him off like a butler. He pointed at Jasmine like he was throwing a dart. This woman is a disgrace. You are grandstanding off a pandemic, exploiting families for political theater. You are disgusting. The room burst into chaos. Committee members barked over one another. Reporters rose to their feet. Phones shot up like rifles. But through it all, Jasmine stood still, arms crossed, face unreadable. She did not flinch. She did not speak. She just let him shout. Trump's face reddened. You think you are clever, Miss Crockett, using funerals to take down my son. Eric's a businessman. He has helped hundreds of families. And you are just another race card lawyer trying to get airtime. A murmur of disbelief swept through the public gallery. Jasmine finally moved, but it was not to speak. She reached into her folder slowly, calmly, like a surgeon preparing for the next incision. The papers she pulled out were not dramatic. They were precise, labeled cross-reference, dated. She laid them quietly on the desk. Trump was not finished. These families do not want your outrage. They want jobs. They want respect. And they sure as hell do not want their grief used as a hammer for your little socialist revolution. The chairman slammed his gavel again. Mr. Trump, you are not recognized. But it was too late. The scene had gone nuclear. News anchors were cutting in live. Every broadcast ticked a red banner. Breaking Donald Trump crashes hearing attacks Rep. Crockett. And Jasmine, still silent, finally looked up. Her eyes met Trump's, not with fear, not with anger, with something colder, calculation. She waited for the yelling to stop, then calmly asked one question. Sir, do you deny signing off on the memo your son referenced? Trump opened his mouth, but no words came. Not right away. Not with that many cameras aimed at the space between truth and denial. A silence crept in, unnatural and thick. And in that stillness, Jasmine leaned slightly forward and asked, Or did you come here today to bury the truth before it buries you? What if fake news could not hide the money trail anymore? The silence following Jasmine's question did not last long. It cracked under Donald Trump's bark like ice under a hammer. Fake news, he growled, his voice echoing through the chamber with all the subtlety of a freight train. This whole circus is fake rigged just like everything else you people do. But Jasmine Crockett did not even flinch. She did not raise her voice. She did not react. She simply turned to the monitor beside her and tapped the clicker once. The screen lit up with a wire transfer log. Clean clinical timestamp $310. 000 sent from the Trump 2020 campaign to Red Elm Holdings, categorized under one vague word: consulting. Her tone was flat, but the words cut sharp. Your son, she said, eyes fixed on Donald, turned death into dollars. And you, sir, signed the checks that kept his pockets warm. The room shifted. Even the Republican side of the aisle stopped moving. One aide leaned forward, mouth slightly open. The air itself felt tighter. Eric Trump, seated behind his father, blinked rapidly. His hand moved to his collar. A drop of sweat ran down his temple. Jasmine clicked again. More transfers appeared. Six-figure payments routed through Shell LLCs, all tied back to the campaign's discretionary funds. Each marked confidential FEC exempt. The labels were not just suspicious, they were radioactive. Donald's jaw tensed. You do not know what those are, he snapped. You do not understand campaign law. I understand Federal Code 52 USC 30,114. Jasmine replied, still calm. Campaign funds cannot be used for personal gain, and they definitely cannot be laundered through a funeral conglomerate. Your son controls, he sneered. You are a liar. Jasmine did not move. It is not fake. It is federal. That sentence landed like a thunderclap. One reporter actually gasped. Another began typing so fast her nails clacked against the tablet like gunfire. On the live stream, comments exploded. Is this real? Did she just say laundered death money? Eric looks like he is going to pass out. Eric Trump, meanwhile, looked like a man who had just realized the floor beneath him was cracking. His face had gone pale. His lips moved slightly, but no sound came out. He leaned toward one of his attorneys who looked equally rattled. Jasmine stepped forward again. These are not baseless claims, she said. These are Treasury-certified documents subpoenaed and authenticated. They show a clear financial relationship between your campaign and a corporate entity that profited from inflated funeral costs during the pandemic. Trump's face twisted. You are grandstanding and you are spiraling. Jasmine said, her voice steel. Because for once you do not control the room. The cameras do not cut when you yell. The facts do not disappear when you rant. And your money trail does not vanish just because you call it a lie. The committee chair finally leaned into his mic. The witness will remain silent, he said to Trump. But it was too late. The damage was done. Jasmine turned back to the audience, those in the chamber and the millions watching from home, and delivered the line that would dominate headlines for the next 72 hours. If grief is a currency, then today we found out who has been cashing the checks. What if one woman's tears could eclipse a president's rage? The air in the chamber had shifted. Not the kind of shift that comes with an argument or a political blow, but the kind that precedes a collapse. Evelyn Monroe, seated behind the gallery railing, clutched the photo of her son like it was a lifeline. Her knuckles whitened, her chest trembled with a breath she could not hold. Then, with the eyes of a nation upon her, she let go. We lost him once. To COVID, she whispered, voice cracking like old wood. And then again to this. Her words did not just echo, they pierced through marble columns and through television screens into living rooms and hospital break rooms and church basements where too many families knew exactly what she meant. It was not just the loss of a life. It was the insult, the desecration, the feeling that their pain had been priced. Evelyn did not cry like someone looking for sympathy. She wept like someone who had carried it too long. Her shoulders folded in. Her fingers clenched the funeral invoice that had been passed around the room like a prop. But for her, it was a wound with numbers stamped across it. She broke down not because the cameras were on, but because for the first time, so was the truth. Jasmine Crockett did not pause. She did not wait for protocol. She stepped down from her seat and moved straight to Evelyn, her heels echoing on the cold tile like the heartbeat of the room. The moment her knees hit the floor beside Evelyn's chair, the camera zoomed in. But Jasmine did not care. This was not about optics. It was about presence. She took Evelyn's hand gently, firmly. A silence swept over the room, so complete even reporters stopped typing. Jasmine looked up into the eyes of the woman who had given voice to the nation's invisible grief, and without raising hers, said everything. "You are not alone," she said, low and steady. "And you are not crazy. They did this." Behind them, Donald Trump snapped. His chair screeched backward like a blade drawn from a sheath. "This is a setup," he shouted, red-faced. "A damn soap opera." He turned and stormed out, but the cameras barely followed. America had stopped watching the man with the microphone. They were watching the woman with the tears. The gavel did not fall. The room did not reset. Jasmine stayed beside Evelyn, still holding her hand like a vow. And across the country, a question carved itself into the minds of millions. If grief has become a commodity, what does that make us when we accept the price? How could luxury thrive while the dying gasped for air? The room had not recovered from Evelyn's collapse when Jasmine rose again. This time her expression was colder, sharper. She returned to her seat without ceremony, but something had shifted in her. Her voice, when it cut back through the silence, was no longer full of empathy. It was laced with something far more dangerous: restraint. "I want to enter Exhibit 37 into the record," she said, holding up a thin stack of glossy printouts. Red Elm Holdings spent $7.2 million remodeling its executive offices in the middle of the pandemic. She stepped aside as the gallery screens behind her blinked to life. What appeared next did not look like a funeral business. It looked like a luxury hotel. The first image, a gold-plated champagne fridge embossed with the Trump family crest. The second, a soundproof presidential grief consultation suite, complete with velvet drapes and leather chairs. "They called it the presidential suite," Jasmine said, letting the words drip like acid, built in April 2020 when hospitals were begging for ventilators. "This is what they were buying." A low groan swept through the chamber. Even the GOP side stiffened. These were not funeral tools. They were indulgences built while Americans were gasping for oxygen and scraping change for burials. "These were not expenses," she continued. "They were statements. Statements that said, 'We know you are grieving and we know exactly how much we can take from you while you are.'" Someone in the back of the press section exhaled too loudly. Reporters began texting furiously. Fox's live feed cut briefly, then resumed. On MSNBC, a banner lit up across the screen: "Trump-linked funeral company accused of pandemic profiteering." Jasmine turned another page. "This massage chair cost $16,200. That is more than some families had for entire funerals. And the fund's COVID emergency reimbursements approved in under 48 hours. She looked up. "Do you know how long it took some families to get stimulus checks? Months? But Red Elm got $7 million with velvet drapes." Eric Trump shifted in his chair, his jaw clenched, but he said nothing. For the first time, he was not smirking. He was sweating. Jasmine paused on one final image. A staff break room lined with flat-screen TVs and a barista machine imported from Switzerland. "They called this grief management infrastructure," Jasmine said flatly. "I call it robbery wrapped in silk." No one laughed. No one coughed. The room had gone cold again. But this time the chill was not from sorrow. It was from rage, simmering just below the surface. And as the chamber sat frozen beneath the weight of gold faucets and champagne receipts, one question hung like smoke in the air. How many lives were stolen twice, once by a virus and again by those who claimed to mourn them? What if a hidden voice from the inside could shatter the unbreakable? The gold-plated horror show had not even faded from the screens when Jasmine signaled the clerk. "Bring in the remote witness," she said calmly. But the ripple that moved through the chamber was anything but calm. A new window appeared on the overhead display. A shaky webcam feed of a man in his 40s, eyes, shadowed jaw-tight background blurred by a federal protection filter. No name shown, just the label "Former Red Elm Operations Manager." He did not wait to be asked. His voice cut through the static like a blade. "Orders came from Eric," he said. "Every single major financial decision, from the suite remodels to funeral upcharges, had to be green-lit by him directly. And whenever we hesitated, he would say, 'Do not worry, my father will make it all disappear.'" Gasps again audible this time. A senator dropped their pen. Jasmine leaned in. "Just to clarify for the record, you are saying Eric Trump not only approved the expense strategy, but invoked his father's name as a shield?" The man did not blink. "Correct. Eric said it more than once. And I quote, 'We will bury the bad press just like the bodies.' Trust me, my father knows people. The air thickened. Even the GOP side stopped fidgeting. No eye rolls now, just silence and sweat. I tried to resign, the man continued. When the pricing matrix started, including emotional distress modifiers, I could not take it anymore. I sent a notice. The next day, I got a legal packet, NDA threats cease and desist. They told me if I talked, I would lose my retirement, my savings, everything. Jasmine's voice was quiet, but it carried like thunder. So you were silenced, he nodded. I still might be. But when I saw what they did to Evelyn Monroe, I could not stay silent anymore. The camera lingered on him for a beat too long. Then it cut to Eric Trump's stone-faced jaw. Clenched arms crossed so tight his knuckles were white. Next to him, Donald's empty seat remained untouched like a throne in exile. Jasmine did not gloat. She did not grandstand. She just turned to the panel and said, "This is not just about fraud. It is about power that assumed it was untouchable. Power that used funerals as cover, grief as a ledger, and NDAs as a leash." Reporters scrambled to keep up. CNN's live feed cut in with an emergency Chiron-breaking insider, links Trump family to pandemic funeral profits. Outside the chamber, Twitter lit up with hashtags like funeral fraud and Trump profiteering. But inside it was Jasmine's courtroom now, and she was not done. As the whistleblower's feed faded to black, his final words echoed in the chamber like a verdict. They knew what they were doing, and they thought they would never be caught. And as America leaned in closer to the screen, one chilling question surfaced from the depths of every living room. If this is what they did with the dead, what might they be doing with the living? How far would disrespect go when bodies became just another commodity? The screen faded to black, but the chill it left behind remained curling through the chamber like a draft from a crypt. Jasmine did not pause. She reached under her binder and pulled out a thick folder, its cover marked with the Department of Health and Human Services seal, and one word in red: violations. She did not raise her voice. She did not have to. The silence had already done the heavy lifting. Red Elm Holdings, she began, eyes scanning the page, was cited in 12 states for improper storage of human remains. Refrigeration units were over capacity, some bodies held for weeks. In 2 cases, she stopped, her voice tightening just enough to crack through every screen in America. They stacked coffins. Stacked. A murmur ran through the room like a tremor. Jasmine turned the page. In Mississippi, they delayed burials while waiting for premium orders to be approved, leaving working-class families in limbo. In Ohio, they double-billed Medicare for the same services. And in Georgia, she paused again, this time letting the weight of what came next land like a falling stone. An inspector reported human remains stored in supply closets next to cleaning fluids. Eric Trump did not move, but his jaw flexed so hard it looked like his teeth might shatter. He whispered something to his lawyer, but Jasmine continued without flinch. They did not just steal money, she said. They disrespected the dead. They turned loss into logistics, grief into a spreadsheet. She tapped her finger on the photo, now glowing on the screen. An image from a state inspection report, a zipped body bag balanced awkwardly on 2 boxes of Clorox wipes. This is what $7.2 million in luxury upgrades paid for, she said. Champagne suites for executives, while someone's mother was shelved like an extra mop. Reporter hands flew across keyboards. One senator covered their mouth. The camera panned to Evelyn Monroe in the gallery, who closed her eyes, as if she could not bear to see what she had already lived. They called this streamlined efficiency, Jasmine added. But let us call it what it really is, desecration. The kind that does not just haunt families, it stains a nation. She held up the file, then slammed it shut with a finality that rang out louder than the gavel had all day. And then she asked, looking straight into the camera, not just at Congress, but at the millions watching from home. When a system stops honoring the dead, how long before it stops valuing the living? What if a secret operation named after ashes could burn down an empire? The lights in the chamber no longer felt like illumination. They felt like interrogation lamps. Jasmine Crockett stood center stage, unshaken, and placed a thick black folder on the table like she was loading a weapon. There was no label, no warning, just one phrase etched across the cover in blunt serif font, unredacted material. Operation Ashfall. The air changed. Even the reporters stopped typing. She looked up, locking eyes with the chairman. This was never meant to see daylight, but grief has a way of surviving red tape. Her voice was not loud. It was leveled, deliberate, the way a prosecutor builds pressure before breaking a case wide open. The Department of Justice has been sitting on this since late 2021. Not because they doubted the evidence, but because the names inside were too powerful to prosecute until now. A wave of silence passed over the room, like the moment before thunder cracks. Jasmine opened the file. The first document slid under the overhead projector, a DOJ briefing memo, the 4th of October 2021. Title: Operation Ashfall. Financial misconduct, emergency relief fraud, and political laundering. On screen, the words glowed like radioactive ash in the dark. Then the first list appeared. Jasmine did not read it. She let the names speak for themselves. Eric Trump, 3 Red Elm executives, PAC intermediaries, campaign bundlers, consulting firms linked to the America First Action PAC. You could hear the breath catch in half the room. A congressional aide in the back coughed nervously. One GOP rep stared at his shoes, but Jasmine was not done. According to the DOJ, these individuals coordinated a transfer of nearly $49 million through emergency funeral reimbursements, expedited payouts, and shell entities designed to conceal movement. Her eyes turned sharp. 48 hours. That is how fast these approvals were pushed through. While nurses were begging for PPE, their attorneys were clearing wire transfers. She flipped to the next page, an internal Red Elm document flagged by forensic auditors. It was not just names. It was routing numbers, timestamps, campaign transaction notes. $5,000 here as mortuary enhancement consulting, $32,000 there as bereavement logistics, and then back into the political bloodstream. She paused and stared into the camera lens. You do not need a map to see where that money went. It went to ads to PACs, to plane rides, to protect the very people who orchestrated this grief-for-profit pipeline. Then came the moment no one could ignore. Jasmine pulled a printed email, black ink on white paper, and read slowly. Eric says, Dad's office will keep the heat off. Just bury the rest. The gallery froze. Reporters stopped blinking. Someone whispered Jesus, but Jasmine did not flinch. She raised the page slightly higher. That is not conspiracy. That is coordination. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. And that phrase, just bury it, that was not about a body. That was about the truth. Eric Trump leaned forward, lips pressed tight, face red with heat. His lawyer scribbled furiously beside him, whispering something too fast to hear. But the damage was done. Jasmine turned to the committee and said, We have spent years telling American families they were seen, that their loss mattered. Meanwhile, a second business was being run in the shadows, where death paid dividends and silence paid better. She tapped the folder one last time. The DOJ called this premeditated manipulation of trauma for political enrichment. I call it a betrayal of the dead. Her eyes scanned across the room, stopping directly at the C-SPAN camera. So I will ask again. How many more secrets were buried? What if silence shattered under the weight of unchecked fury? While America was mourning, Eric Trump had not said a word since Jasmine unveiled the unredacted DOJ files. His jaw-clenched fingers twitching against the desk, sweat forming at his temples under the studio lights. The air in the chamber had thickened, so charged it felt like it might ignite. His father had stormed out. The committee was watching. America was watching. Then something snapped. Eric slammed his palm on the table and stood, voice rising like a fire alarm. You are just an angry activist, not a congresswoman. His words cracked the silence like a bullet shattering glass. Reporters jolted upright. Gasps rippled across the room like tremors before a quake. One GOP aide pulled out their phone mid-recording. The hearing had just gone nuclear, but Jasmine did not move. She did not blink. Her spine stayed straight as steel, her eyes locked on him like twin lasers. Then, with a calm that felt almost surgical, she said, I am angry because I am awake, and America is too. Her voice did not shout. It cut sharp enough to draw blood. For a split second, even Eric seemed stunned. He stood frozen, caught in the glare of his own meltdown. The chairman banged the gavel twice hard, but the echoes of Eric's outbursts still hung in the air. Journalists were already tweeting. Cable news anchors were prepping split screens. This was not just drama. It was history live on television. Jasmine took a slow breath, then stepped forward. You do not get to label me to silence me, she said, her words ringing clear. You may be used to rooms where women stay quiet and the money talks, but this is not one of those rooms anymore. Her gaze swept over the chamber. You did not just get caught, you got caught loud. Eric opened his mouth, but no words came. His lawyer reached up, tugging his sleeve, whispering something urgent, but the damage was done. His outburst had crossed a line, and Jasmine had drawn it in real time. Then she held up a still frame from a campaign ad, the kind funded by one of the PACs Red Elm helped bankroll. The slogan read, "Protecting American Values." Jasmine turned the screen toward the gallery. "Is this what you mean by values monetizing funerals while your father campaigns on morality?" The question was not for Eric anymore. It was for every camera, every household, every American still clinging to the idea that corruption always wears a mask. Eric looked smaller now, not because he sat down, but because the room had outgrown him. Jasmine stepped back to the microphone, her tone sharpening. "You called me angry. You are damn right I am. I am angry because thousands of families trusted a system that was sold out from under them by people like you." Her voice cracked slightly, not with weakness but weight. "And I will not apologize for turning that anger into action." A beat passed. Then applause broke out, not from the committee, but from the public gallery. A woman in a church hat dabbed her eyes. A veteran stood in the back row, saluting silently. The moment was no longer political. It was personal. Jasmine lowered the mic, letting the silence speak. And then, like a dagger wrapped in velvet, she asked, "If calling out corruption makes me angry, what does staying silent make you? What if one outburst turned a hearing into a battlefield?" The gavel came down like a gunshot. "Order," the chairman shouted, but the room had already exploded. Eric Trump's words, "You are just an angry activist, not a congresswoman," hung in the air like tear gas. Staffers were scrambling to mute mics. Reporters were standing on chairs. And security guards tightened their formation near the exits. What had started as a congressional hearing now looked more like a courtroom meltdown on live television. Every second was being clipped, streamed, and dissected in real time. Jasmine did not flinch. She sat still, spine straight, eyes locked forward, not on Eric, who was now red-faced and pacing, but on the camera. Then she said it slow and sharp. "I am angry because I am awake, and America is too." Her voice did not shake. It cracked the silence open like glass. The gallery felt quiet, not from resolution, but from realization. The chairman tried again. "We are calling a temporary recess until," but even he knew the room was already lost. Phones buzzed as headlines updated by the second. Funeral fraud shot to #1 on X. Clips of Eric losing control were now viral, under tags like Trump meltdown and pandemic profiteers. Within 6 minutes, over 3.4 million viewers had tuned in to watch the hearing replay from the beginning. The nation was not just watching, they were locked in. As Eric was quietly escorted out by 2 staffers, Jasmine leaned toward her microphone. They said, "We were politicizing grief, but who turned tears into invoices?" She held up one of the internal Red Elm memos, the kind with blacked out names and numbered codes. They did not just steal money. They did not just bury the truth. They buried dignity, buried it under tax shelters, campaign checks, and marble flooring. She glanced toward the lens again. If silence was safety, why did they hide everything? The chairman banged his gavel a final time. "The hearing is suspended until further notice," but no one moved. Reporters whispered like they were in a cathedral. Jasmine quietly gathered her notes. Behind her, Evelyn Monroe sat trembling. One hand clutched the photo of her son. The other gripped Jasmine's opening statement, now tear-streaked, and folded into her lap like a prayer. Outside, police formed barriers. Protesters had already arrived. The air in D.C. did not just feel heavy. It felt radioactive. Something had cracked wide open, and it was not going back. But when the hearing resumed 17 hours later, someone new walked in with a sealed brief. And it was not a lawyer who gave them access to the vault file. And why did it have Donald Trump's initials on every page? What if a reckoning arrived not with thunder, but with unyielding resolve? By the time the hearing resumed, the marble walls felt colder, heavier. Overnight news cycles had combusted. Protesters now lined the Capitol steps with signs that read, "Grief is not for sale, and accountability now." Cameras repositioned, wires replugged, but the energy had changed. It was not just a hearing anymore. It was a reckoning. Jasmine Crockett stepped back into the chamber like someone carrying a verdict. No entourage, no theatrics, just a folder tucked beneath her arm and a stare that could slice marble. When the chairman gave in, she did not wait for small talk. She stood, cleared her throat, and said plainly, "I am introducing legislation this morning." She held the document high, the Funeral Accountability Act. The room stilled. A bill that demands audits for every dollar, dispersed under the COVID-19 Funeral Assistance Program. No exceptions, no delays, full transparency, criminal liability for fraud. Murmurs sparked along the Republican side. One member scoffed under his breath. Grandstanding. But Jasmine did not blink. We gave grieving Americans our word we would help them bury their dead with dignity. Instead, some helped themselves to marble countertops, champagne fridges, and political consulting fees. She walked to the large screen. With a click, she displayed a map of funeral reimbursement hotspots, with pins blinking red like fresh wounds. These are zip codes where the highest reimbursements were filed predominantly Black, Latino, and low-income communities. Places where questions are not asked because trauma already suffocates every room. Another click, a timeline appeared. In some of these districts, reimbursements were approved in under 48 hours, but hospitals were waiting weeks for ventilators. Tell me, how does grief move faster than medicine? Across the aisle, several committee members shifted uncomfortably. Jasmine pointed to the center of the screen. At the heart of it all, Red Elm Holdings, and behind it, a trail that leads to campaign funds, family names, and a pattern of impunity. Eric Trump was not present. Neither was his father, but their absence only amplified her presence. She turned back to the panel. I know what some of you are thinking, that this is political. Her voice hardened. It is, but not in the way you think. This is about the politics of grief, the cost of loss, the monetization of mourning. Then almost gently, she said, grief is sacred. We cannot afford to sell it. Not again. Reporters typed like their keyboards were on fire. Behind Jasmine, Evelyn Monroe stood silently, one hand pressed over her heart. On social media, the phrase Funeral Accountability Act began to trend before Jasmine even left the microphone. The chairman paused. Representative Crockett will review the proposed bill, but she was already gathering her notes calm as thunder just before it cracks. But just before she reached the door, a staffer intercepted her, young, pale, and shaking slightly. He held out a flash drive, whispering just loud enough, "You will want to see this." It was not just funerals. Jasmine froze mid-step. She took the drive without a word, turned back toward the desk, and sat down again. Her eyes narrowed as if she could already feel the weight of what was inside. Something unspoken passed between her and Evelyn in the front row, an intuition, a chill. What else did the Trump network bury besides bodies? What if a single vote could rewrite the rules of accountability? The flash drive burned in Jasmine's jacket pocket like a lit fuse, but she said nothing. Not yet. One war at a time. For now, all eyes were on the screens mounted high above the chamber digital boards, waiting to record history in red or green. The Funeral Accountability Act had been introduced, debated, and now it would be judged. Tension sat thick in the air. No applause, no chatter, just silence and breath holding. The vote was electronic, but it felt ancient, like something sacred carved into stone or scratched into memory. Jasmine sat upright at her desk, hands laced her eyes, locked on the screen, not blinking, not praying, just waiting. The clerk began the roll. Representative Adams. Yes. Representative Ballantyne. Number names droned on each one, striking like a heartbeat. But something shifted around the 23rd call. When the clerk reached Representative Calhoun of Georgia, a staunch Republican known for voting party line, he did not answer right away. The room stiffened. Cameras zoomed in. Calhoun leaned forward, elbows on the desk, his hand trembling slightly as he reached for the mic. I buried my sister in April 2020, he said quietly. Paid $19 for a casket no one saw. I told myself it was just the cost of grief. He paused, looking straight at Jasmine. But now I know it was the cost of silence. The room held its breath. Even Jasmine blinked just once. The clerk repeated Representative Calhoun. Calhoun exhaled, slow, sharp, then said into the mic, yes. Gasps did not come from the public gallery. They came from the committee itself. Eyes widened. Whispers swept the room like a breeze through dry leaves. Then another Republican, this one from Pennsylvania, voted yes as well. Jasmine did not flinch. She just tapped her pen once on the wood like she knew. When the final tally locked in 217 to 213, the screens flashed green. Just enough. Just barely, but enough. The chamber did not explode. It inhaled. Reporters scrambled to tweet. Cable news tickers lit up. Protesters outside screamed with joy, but Jasmine, she only exhaled, slow and silent, like someone finally releasing the weight of a casket from her shoulders. Across the aisle, a few Republicans sat frozen, realizing the ground had shifted beneath them. One muttered, "We just lit a fire we cannot put out." Another stormed out. But some stayed silent, hollow-eyed, watching Jasmine like she had become something more dangerous than expected. The chairman cleared his throat. The bill passes, gavel down, but the sound was not one of victory. It was a warning shot. Jasmine stood not triumphantly but deliberately. She gathered her papers, slid them into her leather folio, and paused before leaving. She looked up at the board one last time, not to gloat but to memorize it. A record not of votes but of lines crossed, masks dropped, silence broken. As she turned to exit, a younger Democratic aide whispered, "You just made enemies." Jasmine smiled faintly without looking back. "No, I just reminded them who the country belongs to." But the victory would not breathe long, because outside that chamber the storm had not passed. The flash drive still waited, quiet, cold, full of names and dates and receipts. The bill may have passed, but something deeper had just begun. And what Jasmine would uncover next might make the funeral scandal look like a footnote. What if raising the truth meant facing the fire it sparked? The chamber had not emptied. Not really. Some members had already slipped out, mumbling excuses, dodging reporters. But most remained seated not out of duty, but because something in the air told them to stay. History did not always roar. Sometimes it whispered through the bones of a room that had just seen too much. Jasmine rose slowly. She did not need to raise her voice. She had the floor, but more importantly, she had their silence. Her heels tapped against the tile as she stepped toward the center, the way a preacher walks back to the pulpit after the storm. She did not bring notes. She did not need them. "We did not raise the dead today," she said, each word cutting through the stillness like a bell toll. "But we raised the truth and we laid something else to rest. Shame disguised as prophet." Her voice did not tremble. It climbed steady like a slow tide, washing over the marble. She paused. Her eyes scanned the room. Not just the lawmakers, but the staffers, the aides, the janitors, the guards by the door. Every family that buried someone they loved twice. First to a virus, then to a lie. They deserve more than silence. Her words hit like a drum, beat against the ribs of the nation. Behind her, Evelyn Monroe stood again, not to speak, but to bear witness. Her hands clasped in front of her, her chin high. And when Jasmine turned and met her eyes, there was no applause, just a single nod. It was all the closure Jasmine needed. All the fire she had left now turned to light. Jasmine looked toward the press gallery. They want us to move on, to forget, to shrug and scroll. But this pain did not come with an expiration date, and neither will our justice. She took a breath, not from exhaustion, but from restraint, the kind that comes from choosing to speak when it matters most. As she gathered her things for the final time, a voice from the back of the chamber whispered. She did not just expose corruption. She buried denial. Outside, the sun had started to drop, casting long shadows across the Capitol steps. But inside, a fire had been lit. And as Evelyn walked beside Jasmine toward the exit cameras, still rolling, mics still hot, the question hanging in every corner was not whether the truth had been heard. It was whether America would dare to act on it. What if one story ignited a nation's awakening? Newsrooms scrambled to cut together footage. No graphics, no filters, just raw feed. Clips of Jasmine's words replayed on a loop, punctuated by headlines that could not catch up fast enough. Funeral gate, they called it. Blood money, Trump family profiteering. Some anchors stammered, others wept. One, a silver-haired veteran on MSNBC, simply said, "We will remember today like we remember Watergate." Only this time, the bodies were already in the ground. Across Chicago's South Side, a mother of 4 clutched her daughter and cried silently at the sight of Evelyn Monroe. In El Paso, a Spanish-language channel translated Jasmine's speech in real time with subtitles that blurred from the cameraman's tears. On the stoop of a row house in Baltimore, someone whispered, "She did not just fight Trump. She fought for all of us who got the bill after the casket." Protest signs rose like a tide. Some held photos of their loved ones with funeral receipts taped beside them. Others painted Jasmine's face on cardboard, not angry, not triumphant, but fierce, honest human. In one mural in Detroit, her image was surrounded by roses and gravestones, with the words "Truth over Profit" scrolled above her head in crimson spray paint. Evelyn Monroe sat for a late-night interview, hands folded tightly in her lap. "Justice does not bring my baby back," she said, voice trembling but steady. "But they did not just take my son's body. They took my right to mourn him properly. This gave it back." The host tried to move on, but Evelyn held up her son's last photo. He died, scared, alone. Now at least the people who cashed in on that fear have names. In a diner in Des Moines, two older veterans nodded through Jasmine's closing remarks on the newsfeed. She is not just a congresswoman, one muttered. She is what Congress forgot it could be. Meanwhile, in Times Square, someone hacked the digital billboard to flash Jasmine's quote in bold white letters. We did not raise the dead, we raised the truth. Outside the Capitol, candles lit up the stairs like constellations. No protest chants, just quiet. Reverence across the street, an artist on scaffolding painted her final stroke on a 6-story mural. Jasmine, one hand raised, the other clutching Evelyn's. The backdrop, a collage of funeral homes and headlines. The paint had not even dried when tourists started snapping photos. They did not smile, they did not pose. They just looked up and asked the question that now echoed far beyond Washington. How did we let it go this far before someone finally stood up? What if victory's echo revealed an even darker silence? The roar of the country had not yet faded when something stranger filled its place. Silence. Not the kind that comes with resolution, but the kind that arrives like smoke after an explosion. First came the corporate filings. Red Elm Holdings, once paraded as a resilient pandemic success story, was now just a name buried in bankruptcy court. The official statement blamed unfair political attacks. But the public knew better. You do not shut the doors of a multi-million-dollar empire unless something inside had already rotted through. Eric Trump disappeared from public view like a man trying to outwalk a shadow. His social media accounts went dormant. No press statements, no defiance, just one shaky paparazzi photo outside a Manhattan townhouse head, down hands shielding his face. Gone was the cocky surrogate, the heir to the brand of brashness. In his place stood a man who had watched the Trump name turn toxic in real time and could not stop the bleeding. Donald Trump, ever the showman, did what no one expected. He said nothing. Not a tweet, not a rally, not a single deflection before the cameras. When reporters cornered him outside Mar-a-Lago, he waved them off with a grumble and a stare. His usual allies were suddenly tight-lipped too. No Fox interviews, no Truth Social tirades. It was as if a script had run out of lines, but the Justice Department had no intention of letting the curtain fall quietly. Just days after Jasmine's bill passed, a sealed motion was filed in federal court. DOJ attorneys citing probable cause for financial crimes committed under the guise of national emergency relief submitted their intent to pursue indictment. The names included were chilling in their familiarity. Eric Trump, 2 senior Red Elm executives, and an unnamed former government official with direct knowledge of payment pipelines. Outside, the courthouse cameras waited in the rain. Inside, legal teams scrambled behind closed doors. No more reality television bravado. No crowds, only depositions and deadlines, and the cold, grinding gears of justice beginning to turn. In the void left by their silence, the story did not stop. It grew. Editorials poured in from both left and right. Op-eds did not argue about race or class this time. They argued about dignity. One paper put it simply, this was not a partisan scandal, it was a human one. And it took a congresswoman from Texas to remind us what grief is worth. In the final shot broadcast that week, news anchors sat quietly as the screen faded to black. Only one caption remained below the network logo. Just 7 words, as if spoken aloud by the American people, where money talks silence, finally confessed guilt. What if the empty room held the loudest truth of all? The chamber was empty now, save for a single figure still seated beneath the flickering lights. Jasmine Crockett did not move at first. She just stared at the echoes. The microphones were off. The cameras had gone dark. The storm had passed, but the air still buzzed, as if the walls themselves were replaying every scream, every silence, every name spoken like a wound. She reached forward and slowly closed the folder in front of her, not with finality, but with care, as if sealing a wound, not erasing it. Her hand hovered for a moment on the cover. Then she stood, not with triumph, but with gravity. Her footsteps echoed across the floor, no applause, following only truth left behind like fingerprints on the desks. Outside, headlines were already rewriting legacies. But inside, Jasmine paused one last time before the exit. Her eyes swept the rows of vacant chairs, the nameplates of those who had rolled their eyes, the space where Evelyn had wept, and the very seat where Donald Trump had roared and then vanished. And then, without turning to camera, her voice came like a whisper, sharpened into a blade. We asked who sold grief, she said, but maybe the harder question is who bought it. A beat of silence followed, not hollow but heavy. She walked out alone, her shadow, long in the corridor lights. Just as the doors swung shut behind her, a draft of wind from the marble hall caught something on the floor. A forgotten protest poster curled at the edges, slid across the tiles, stopping at the foot of the camera tripod. In bold black marker smudged by rain, it read, "He died alone." They cashed in. The screen faded to black. Then just one final line appeared white on black. If this were your family, would you stay silent? What if speaking truth meant carrying it beyond the shadows? When Jasmine stepped out of that hearing room, there were no more gavels, no flashing cameras, just a silence heavy with the question no one wanted to answer. Some wounds do not bleed. They linger in how a nation treats the grief of the powerless. Justice cannot bring back the dead, but it can keep the next family from being sold a lie. If someone profited from your pain, would you stay silent? If this story touched your heart, leave a comment and share it with someone you love. Because sometimes truth does not need an echo, just one voice willing to speak. If this story moved, you do not just scroll. They tried to profit off our pain, bury truth beneath marble and money. But one voice armed with grief and facts refused to stay silent. If you believe grief should never be for sale, share this with someone who needs to hear it. What part broke your heart the most? Leave a comment. Let us not forget what they did with the dead. Let us honor them together. This dramatized story is inspired by real struggles and real people. All characters and dialogue are fictionalized for commentary and education. It is not intended to defame or mislead, but to inspire reflection and civic awareness. Thanks for watching. The truth did not end here. It is just waiting for someone brave enough to carry it forward.